Do we want to get to 100 and beyond if the last 20 years we're riddled with disease or can't live our life with the same level of enjoyment and quality of life? So one thing that I really love that you talk a lot about is health span versus lifespan. And I'd love for you to touch on what that means for you from an MD's perspective.
Yeah, totally. So I'm a little bit of a warning. This is going to be a little bit morbid, but I'm going to
Let's
give you
go
my
for it.
honest.
Let's go for it.
It's going to be a little bit morbid, but one of the things that I do is oftentimes I have patients of mine who are in their 40s or 50s, and they'll say, my mother or father has gotten a bit sicker. We would really love it if you could kind of help us here at this point in their lives. And oftentimes it ends up being what we call end of life care. And what happens is I'm now stepping into someone's life who maybe I didn't even know. And if they're in their, whatever it may be, sometimes they're in their late 70s, 80s, sometimes I actually just recently, I started taking care of a patient who's 98.
Wow.
I just became his doc at age 98. And so clearly these are folks who sort of are close to or potentially at the end of their journey. And I'm saying this as an example of this may be a person who led a wonderfully healthy life, a productive life. And whatever it might be, they got diagnosed with cancer, they had an MI, they now have heart failure, sort of walking a person through what end of life care actually looks like and walking their family through what that actually looks like is kind of one of the opportunities. And to be honest, this has nothing to do with travel, but I'm just going to kind of just touch on this. It's like in this society, in our country, and in our culture, people tend to have such a fear of dying, but yet they have this reluctancy to live when they're alive. And so for better or for worse, I've been exposed and been involved on a very intimate level in the end of so many people's lives that it kind of has forced me to make sure that I'm constantly looking back and thinking about that. And I don't think most people at the end are going to look back and say, I'm so glad that I didn't take that trip. I have, my visits are long with my patients, hour plus most of the time. So we talk about these things very rarely towards the end of a person's health span, right? Because I have these patients who sell their businesses, they're 76 years old, and now they're ready to say, okay, I sold my business, I want to go and travel. And it's like, well, you can't take 3 steps because you've congestive heart failure. So doing these 9 pillars, the whole idea is to not only expand upon our lifespan, but making sure that we're expanding our health span so that when we have that, whether it's a financial luxury or whether it's the luxury of time, we still have the physical ability to do things like travel and take these trips and continue to live a fruitful life. Kind of what I was getting at is at the end, when it's the end, modern medicine, and one of the things that we're so good at is just keeping people alive, technically alive, but not living. And so I really try to make sure that when I have the opportunity to meet people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, we try to make sure that we're doing all of the things necessary so that when they're in their seventh, eighth, or ninth decade of life, they still have the independence and the energy and the freedom from a health perspective to continue living their life. And I really think travel is actually a huge part of that because I do sort of take care of people that have financial means for the most part. They have the ability to travel from a financial standpoint, but sometimes it's just so difficult, whatever medical issue they may or may not be dealing with. Although I will say, I think JetSet has allowed some of these people to feel like they're a little bit more apt to get out there and see the world in their 70s, 80s, or even 90s. I actually have one patient who's 92 and his wife is younger, but they're on a cruise in the Amazon right
Oh
now.
my God. Wow.
Yeah, he's like really out there.
That's awesome.
And he's a guy who was taking care of himself for 70 years, which allowed him to get to the point where he's at now. So yeah, so health span versus lifespan comes into play oftentimes when it comes to end of life care. And Dan Buettner touches on this a little bit, but in those blue zone regions of the world, they're not keeping people alive, right? Like in nursing homes and like we are, frankly, in America. When it's time, right? These people aren't like on life prolonging type medicines and things like that. So not only do the people in the blue zone live to be 100, but they really live. They're living while they're getting to 100. So and beyond. It is a really important distinction. It's like one of the hardest things that I have to do is kind of help walk people through end of life care, especially if that person's lifespan is continuing, but their health span has ended.
Mm.
That's a really difficult place to be.
You said at the start of this about healthspan versus lifespan that it wasn't about travel, but I think it has everything to do with it because first off, like you mentioned right at the start, was the culture piece. And that's what we talk a lot about on this podcast is culture. There are so many cultures around the world that honor the experience that is death. Like I think of the Maori culture in New Zealand and other cultures
Mhm.
around the world where they sit with the person who has deceased for days and honor them and celebrate them. And death is not something to be shy about. And I think that in turn, this also often in Buddhist cultures as well, I think
Mhm.
that in turn forces those who are alive around you to reevaluate constantly the amount of life that you're living. And I think that's something that we don't do very well here in America and in other Western cultures is not have that constant reevaluation of the quality of our life. And then to go on to the piece of health span versus lifespan, I think about that all the time is yeah, well, I could wait until I'm, in my 50s and my 60s and my 70s to go on that trip, but I'm not going to go on the back of a 125cc motorbike and drive through the mountains of northern Thailand. Or I won't be as open to that. I'm not going to go like slide down a mountain because it's raining, and I'm not going to have the same zest for that level of adventure when I'm older. And
Mhm.
even now with kids, I have a lot less aptitude for risk. So that is such an important role to play when we're considering what opportunities to take in our life, whether it's a business or travel or a marriage or whatever. That's going to stay with me for a really long time is your lifespan
Mhm.
might continue on, but your health span won't. I mean, how many times do we hear, I'm going to work really hard and then when I retire, I'm going to go travel? And it's like, well, your knees might not let you go hike in New Zealand anymore. So if you can do it, go for it. And I'm
100%.
curious just to hear what has that experience of working in end of life care given to you on your own perspective of your own life?
It really helps you put things into perspective, right? This is a little bit personal, if you will, but an example that comes to mind is without getting into too much detail, but I had a health scare. And when I discovered this, I was with a person who didn't know me all that well. And that person was looking at my reaction to this health scare, which, by the way, thankfully, everything turned out perfectly fine. But it was like for a short period of time, it looked like there was could be some very, very serious thing occurring. And this person looked at me and she said, I cannot believe how calm you were surrounding that situation. And it's like, well, I've kind of walked myself through that situation thousands of times, having had pronounced people dead many, many, many times and been there at the end. And so it wasn't so shocking to me. She just couldn't believe how sort of calm I was under that circumstance. I think I've been psychologically trained to sort of understand the fact that all of us, our days are coming, right? And God willing, it's not tomorrow. But at the end of the day, when your career and your job forces you to face that, it's sort of like at what you're alluding to these cultures where they sort of honor death. I wouldn't say that necessarily I participate in it at that level, but when it's part of your everyday life, it affects you much much differently. I think it's allowed me to kind of, I don't want to say keep my cool, but it's allowed me to just sort of previously in life, in medical school, you see things and you're like, holy cow, right? So when you're in your 20s and you get exposed to these things and you're like, oh my God, it's so eye opening. And then as the decades go on, you sort of maybe gain that wisdom at a little bit of a younger age than others might, kind of a thing.
Mm.